Bueno, pues buenos días, ya casi tardes, a todos y a todas.
Good afternoon to you all. So let's continue in this doctoral seminar, Modernization and Governance in Europe. The European projects modernization and governance in a plural framework with shared values and goals, part of the Charles V European Award to Marcelino OREJA. And now we are going to be talking about a very sensitive and delicate topic by Santiago López Rodríguez from the University of Extremadura. He will be talking about European immigrants and the new Jewish exodus. So he will be chaired by Rosa María Martínez de Codes, a member of the jury of this grant. She is a professor of American history by the Complutense University of Madrid, and also appointed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain for a special commission on American relations between 1996 and 1998. And she's now the vice president of the International Religious Liberty Association of Washington and the European Academy of Social Affairs, and also vice president of the Observatory of the Pluralism and Cohabitation Association of the Government of Spain. She's a member of several fellow several associations. You have all the details in the CV, in the dossier, and she will be. She has a similar profile to the person that she will be chairing today. This is a topic that I like. It is a very sensitive, and I hope the debate will be rich. Before I give the floor to Rosa, I would like to thank her for being with us today, for being a member of the jury. It is a professor. She's a professor we've been collaborating for a long time. She's very versatile. She's also the president, the director of a course on Charles V that we hold every year. Charles V from several perspectives, and she will be directing it in Yuste in a few weeks' time. So thank you for spending these 3 days with us and for your help and the constant counseling you give us. Thank you, Rosa. You have the floor.
Muy buenas tardes a todos los presentes y quiero agradecer al equipo humano de la Fundación la posibilidad de desarrollar este curso aquí. Un equipo humano que está siempre detrás apoyando todo lo que hacemos. Muchas gracias. También al equipo de cabina, que está teniendo una labor fenomenal, porque la velocidad con la que hablamos los españoles no deja tregua a quien tiene que hacer de intérprete. Gracias a Jesús y Nadia. Y por fin al equipo de grabación que recrea nuestras interpretaciones para el futuro. Y lo que importa es el futuro. Quiénes nos van a escuchar y quiénes nos van a leer. Pero es que aquí se queda la imagen y se queda la palabra. Y ese es uno de los grandes retos que tenemos. Bueno, gracias Miguel Ángel y gracias Juan Carlos. Y gracias Marcelino porque has sabido incorporar en este programa algo que normalmente no se tiene, se pierde. En el conjunto de la reflexión sobre Europa se pierden los valores. ¿Dónde están los valores? Entonces, gracias por meterlo en el programa, en la frase, y por poner...
in the program and to put it on the program. This has to do with the values. It has to do with a delicate and sensitive aspect that we all have to reflect upon. Parts of the migratory question, it departs from the migratory question, but not from outside, but from inside, because migratory movements are arriving in Europe with greater multiplicity and speed than those that come from outside. The internal influx is bigger than the one that comes from outside. there is a group that's seen from the inside the European Union, those who are the members of the European Union, that for X reasons are forced to migrate, to go to other countries from inside or outside the EU. Santiago López Rodríguez will, whom I have met in this doctoral seminar, has been courageous enough to take upon in his research. I have to thank his tutor, Professor Moradiellos, who this is a hidden topic, but it is a very important issue because it has a symbolic value charge that so strong that it needs to be debated. It is necessary that this fora take into account this issue. Santiago López brings the issue of European immigrants, the new Jewish exodus. He refers to a collective of Jews that live in France and that for certain reasons they had to go to a country that is safer. We are talking the figures he has found in this complicated research. It is not the figures what is important for that migratory group that has to relocate itself. We're not talking of figures, but the reasons of why. And he goes to the causes. Which are the causes that motivate that Jewish communities have to go from France to other countries seeking for security or safety? This is what is beyond or behind this game, metaphorically speaking, of migration. It is an ethnic religious minority because they are Jews. And in Europe, we know very well the protection given to ethnic religious minorities. It is one of the constants in any directive or regulation in Europe. Another story is whether we have all the instruments to mitigate that. But the inspiration in its foundation of the European project, that preoccupation was already there, and a lot has been done on that. The new Jewish exodus, to which Santiago López refers to, has to do with anti-Semitism in our days, and this is the central issue. And this is his invitation to reflect. Why have they got to move? Why have to relocate themselves, these Jewish communities? Because behind there is a pressure that he will explain, and a movement and an ideology called anti-Semitism, contemporary anti-Semitism. Some indications on this he's going to explain very well, because it's important to understand something. All of you may have in your head a model on the Jewish question in Europe, because at one moment or another you must have faced the reflection, the idea, or the interpretation regarding anti-Semitism. I'm sure of that. That is why it is a sensitive issue, because everyone has in one's head something regarding anti-Semitism. Perhaps it is a prejudice or a previous idea. Contemporary anti-Semitism is manifested openly and subtle, both in places where important Jewish communities exist or where there are few Jews. The traditional anti-Semitism forms persist and can be found in the whole world. One could mention a classical anti-Semitic, like the Zion Protocols and the Mein Kampf. Jews continue to be blamed with double loyalty, control of communication media, etc. And the symbols used are old forms of anti-Semitism in our societies. It has been a phenomenon which is capable of adaptation, and this is what is interesting in the analysis made by Santiago. The new forms of anti-Semitism have evolved, incorporating traditional anti-Semitism, but the new or contemporary anti-Semitism, as it's called in Anglo-Saxon bibliography, is anti-Zionism and Israeli policies, and this is clear in the Middle East and in many other communities in Europe. He has gone further from the migratory issue of this Jewish grouping. He's been trying to see the keys of anti-Semitism. Is it left or right ideology? Is something that has to lead us to negate the state of Israel? Is something that derives from the Holocaust? Is it an ideology that converts the Jew in a Nazi? These are questions that are part and parcel of an expansive model in Europe where the indexes are mixed. When I say that anti-Semitism changed its form throughout history, new times, new forms, these new forms generate different assumptions in different cultures and different moments. Each history, in every moment of history, has served to justify persecution and persecution of Jews. The anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages, in the Enlightenment, in the Nazis, in the Muslim recently, or the left-wing anti-Semitism. One of the difficulties of this phenomenon is that there is no legal definition. There are agreements on what it is, but they are mostly methodological, if you want, to understand each other of what we understand when we speak of anti-Semitism. But what is important to understand these new manifestations of anti-Semitism, and that is why he has tried to give visibility to those images that the press brings to our homes, that caricature examples of to exorcise the Jewish devil. These are the images which are outside the ideals and values of the European Union. I wish also to mention a maximum value in his presentation. Anti-Semitism as a comparative issue, not just from the United Kingdom, from Spain, or from France, or from Poland. He has played on this occasion with the French, United Kingdom and Spain models, because they are differentiated views, and that is interesting to see the charge of anti-Semitism. I congratulate Santiago because he has made a great effort, and in his project of PhD dissertation, this aspect is going to illustrate greatly his vision, and congratulations, as I said.
Bueno, lo primero, como no.
First of all, thank you for the presentation that has made a summary that makes it difficult for me to be at the level with that great synthesis that she has given, and how she has really gleaned all the details. We are in this place, and I wish to thank the foundation. I come from the University of Extremadura, but it is a great privilege to be here and now in this historic place and presenting in front of figures like Don Marcelino. Thank you for introducing these themes of the European values, because surrounded by people from the fields of law and other fields, we historians, instead of giving solutions, we pose problems. And here, with all those who are around, I put on the table some problems. I wouldn't dare to say the solutions, but I will talk of the differences and the causes. In my presentation, this is more or less the index of what I'm going to talk about. Now, I am based on that, on those surveys that the European Agency for Fundamental Rights has started doing since 2013 and 2018 with a case study incredible until then, with 16,500 Jews interviewed in those years that showed a number of statistical indexes that, in contrast with other empirical or demoscopic data, allow us to see European problematic that doesn't come from now, but it's been shown in the last few years for a convergence of factors, particularly since 2009 until now. So I hope you allow me, of a historian's license. Very often there is a confusion, terminologically speaking, that it is clear sometimes in the press and even in academic areas. This terminological precision, which has to do with philosophy, it is important to differentiate between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism, this is a relief of the Ark of Titus with the conquest of Israel in the year 70. This anti-Judaism comes from antiquity, from the Hellenistic, the Egyptians, Rome, and it's been kept since the 4th century after Christ, is because of the defeat of the synagogue in the hands of the church. And in those centuries, from the 4th to the 7th century, the Jew is the other for the church. We're not talking of nation states. The figures and the identities are created. We've been talking about identities. The other is the Jew, and it is the other for centuries. So, in anti-Judaism of Christian approach, is the people, the chosen people that killed Messiah. The problem that the Jews had was with polytheist cultures, even the cult to the emperor that created conflict. But now the chosen people, we can see, for those who like art, if you go to a Gothic cathedral in Spain, France, or Britain, you can see many reliefs with the Jew with a handkerchief around his eyes and unable to recognize the Messiah, and with the scepter broken. So anti-Judaism evolves throughout the years and the centuries, and it is full of superstitions. They killed children for using their blood, the problem with the celebration of Easter, etc. But we reach the 19th century, where that metamorphosis, which I wish to show at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, evolves, because the racial hatred is not so well seen. It has to change. It has to turn into a different thing. Anti-Semitism, if you allow me to quote Leopinsky of 1882, he said, the perception of the Jew in those days for the livings is a dead. For the natives is a foreigner. For poors is a millionaire. For patriots, a homeland. This image could be the same on the right side. Is not by coincidence. The Jew was at the same time the communist and the capitalist, the one that instigated all the wars and the pacifist. He was like a catch for all of all the phobias of the 19th and 20th centuries. And against that anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, which is different, as I said, both share a process clearly chained, which is the prejudice. Sometimes prejudices are created for reasons that derive from an objective issue. For instance, a monotheist from polytheist with different rituals or different food they eat, etc. There are differences that create prejudices. And then discrimination, then exclusion, and we all have in mind the Jewish districts in Spain or in other countries, and the expulsion or extermination in its case. This is what in the past was understood by anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism. I said that anti-Semitism has evolved now. It is different. It exists the same from the past, but it's more marginal. People don't dare in public to speak of the Jew as a different race, like a larva or the vulture or the vermin that lives on the blood of others. As Rosa was saying, there's not a clear definition. The definition proposed by the International Order of Members of Saladians, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews that may be expressed as hatred to Jews. The physical and rhetorical manifestations of anti-Semitism are addressed to Jewish or non-Jewish persons and their properties, and to institutions of the Jewish communities and the places of worship of these communities. It is not very clear, but the European Parliament accepted in July 2017, accepted this. When we speak of contemporary anti-Semitism, it is not only that hatred, racial hatred, it's also to justify an attack to the State of Israel, not for its policies, indiscriminate attack, or make equivalent the Jewish or the Jews wherever they live. For example, if I was criticized as a Spaniard for living in another country just for being a Spaniard, the media sometimes seem to express that they are taking advantage of the Holocaust to get or to put into practice policies that may be criticized. This is one thing, and the other one is to negate the Holocaust, as it happens quite often in some cases. So there is no per se definition accepted unanimously by all communities on anti-Semitism. What is important? Why the European Union has to do and has begun to do since 2013, quite late, interviews on the perception of Jews and the level of comfort in the European Union. The EU forces us in its fundamental rights. Here we have dignity, the non-discrimination, or the Treaty of the European Union, the respect to minorities. Of course, there is more legislation about this that I cannot include here, but generally speaking, a framework is being created on anti-Semitism, how it can be fought, and what can be done. But as the statistics and the exodus that is taking place, there is a deep problem. If Nazism was defeated, anti-Semitism was not. This came out of the ashes of Auschwitz, reformulated. One of the main studies is the Stephen Roth Institute report from Tel Aviv that says that in 2009, in the framework of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, there were attacks to synagogues, beatings of Jewish communities that had nothing to do with Israel because they didn't live in Israel, in different parts of the world. And this began to happen that had some peak periods when Israel and Palestine were more at odds. It doesn't stop, it evolves, as we will see in the graphs, is not stopping, it is increasing. And these are reports from the EU, so there is an empirical basis that allows us to analyze it. That is how it begins to turn into an ideology. It's not a prejudice, it is an ideology which has behind the what is being financed by interest groups that, as I said before, that racial hatred can be articulated in a different manner. New anti-Semitism can allow to attack Jews in a way that is acceptable, socially speaking. Why? Why? It can be seen as anti-Americanist, anti-capitalist, anti-globalization, anti-militarist. If criticism comes from that, they're well seen. Otherwise, there exists a community of the good ones, and if you don't share these critics towards the state of Israel, you are not part of that community of goods. It's a Manichaeist between goods and bad, oppressed and oppressor, 95 against 1% of the population. And in those terms, it's quite difficult to make analysis or to criticize, because you can be left outside of the debate. Anti-Semitism studies are important in the European Union, not just because a minority is being attacked, that has been in Europe since immemorial times, but also because it goes against the principles of any democracy and against the principles of the European Union. So as Democrats, we are interested in putting stop or limit this type of tendencies. So we can turn into the idea that as opposed to the perception that anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism comes from popular groups, not well-informed people, or who ignore the whole dimension, and they speak good of bad, or oppressed and oppressors. There are important thinkers that defend or are supporters of this ideology with no problem. Why? Because the conflict that we are seeing in Europe is its normalization. And we will see that in the press and in images that as historians we usually work on that. I give these examples. Daniel Bernard, a former ambassador of France in the United Kingdom. That shitty little country, he says about Israel. Commissioner of the European Union, Bolkestein, former commissioner from the Netherlands, said that the Dutch Jews would not have a future there because it would be better for them to live because they would create conflict. That type of speech, which is anti-Semitic, which doesn't want to stop the problem. Rather, they say the problem is you, so it's better that you go away from here, is articulated as Finkielkraut in France would say. There are three lines of anti-Semitism. The black one, racial anti-Semitism from extreme right. The red one, the anti-Zionist of groups of a new left, that I will mention right now, and thread which is green, the anti-radical anti-Semitism. here you have an example. The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, said in 2002, if we looked for someone in the world, someone who's more coward, despicable, weak, and frail in its psyche, mind, ideology, and religion, we wouldn't find anyone as a Jew. And I'm not saying the Israeli, I'm saying a Jew. So it's not that he's denying the state of Israel, but it's more the conspirational ideas of the wise of Zion and the Judeo-Masonic approach. There are many statements of this type. I'm not going to go into this, but we turn into a discourse which is important, the difference between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Why is it important to differentiate these concepts? Because the criticism towards the Israeli policies is not anti-Semitism. Criticizing Israel as a state is normal, as you can do with anyone, but we cannot have double standards. We don't do that with other countries. If we criticize Israel for other reasons, it seems that there is like basis behind which moves this type of criticism. And this means that very often in Western Europe, we're not talking of Poland or other countries from Eastern Europe. We see in the media in Western Europe, and recently in the Channel 6 of the Spanish television, they spoke of Israeli apartheid. It can be used, the word genocide for is applied to Israel, as was mentioned before when the reporter said something about Lemkin and the concept of genocide. No, it can be used. What we observe is that the criticism of the state of Israel is quite understandable for the policies it may put into practice. There also exists in graphic humor this caricature, this ridiculing of the creation of stereotypes that are kept, are transformed, evolve. As you can see in caricatures like these ones, appeared in the British press of this Brazilian caricaturist. See the one on the left, how the US, moved by Israel, is showing the world the issue of Holocaust and how they're showing the image of the Holocaust, so that behind is the revenger or the Jew that is going to press the button. On the right, the Star of David is there. It has to do with the blood libel. It is a Manichaeist use of concepts which go ignored by the public in general. Cases like this, with the comparisons of the Nazis, particularly with the conflicts between Israel and Palestine in many media. Gaza, with the prisoners in the concentration or extermination camps, that comparison. From the 60s, we can see that there has been an anti-Semitic wave from the left that was critical with Stalinism, which goes against isms, or the groups of interests, racism, sexism. They are all interests from certain sectors that wish to stay in power or at the summit of power. So Zionism is a racist movement itself. The question is that it was legally accepted, that Zionism was racism. Why? Because that issue was adopted in the General Assembly Resolution 3379 in 1975, which was approved with the support from the USSR and the Arab countries. When the Soviet Union falls, the resolution is removed. Because if we consider that Zionism is racism and not nationalism, what is the difference from the Basque, Kurd, Irish, Breton, Corsican nationalism? Couldn't be all of them compared, that they're all racist nationalism. So it is Zionism disappeared as a racial element, but it is a legal framework there, 1975 and 1991. To arrive at the case studies, United Kingdom, France, and Spain, I wish to show that it has nothing, or not, it has to do not only with conservative countries like Poland or Hungary, but it is perfectly entrenched in our ideology and mentality. I have used a number of reports, you can see them there, European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, some from the US and from Israel, but you can see how those reports are used. The European Union has started case studies which are very interesting. I start then mentioning one element of these three countries. With British anti-Semitism, I begin from the idea that this is a historical license, is a hatred with a long history. One of them had to do in York in 2019. The expulsion of the Jews. We usually have the image of Spain of intolerance because we expelled the Jews and the Moors in 1492 and then in the 17th century. Well, in England this happened in 1290, and it wasn't reestablished the possibility of their return until 4 centuries later. So it's a tradition against the Jews, which is understood in the Middle Ages with the development of modern states, which were based in religion. There are no other mechanisms. There was not a unified school or army, so the minority had to be expelled. The Jew, the Moor, whoever. And then anti-Judaism of classical origin that can be seen in the modern age. You can see Shylock, the Shakespeare or Merchant of Venice, or then in Oliver Twist, where the evil guy is Jew as well, is a Jew. And apart from what appears in the literature, we have the recent reports. This is transformer and reaches up until now. The Community Trust report. These are denunciations on the side of the Jewish community. If you go to the synagogue in Madrid, you can see that the security measures that anyone who has to go for worship, they are concrete walls, detectors, etc. This happens in any capital in Europe. This seems to be normalized. Since it doesn't affect us, it is them. So here, this is the the report of the Security Trust. 2007, 2018. As you can see, 2009 to 2014. Conflicts between Palestine and Israel. Those are the peaks. But what is important is the trend. If they had those peaks, what is curious is that it has been in the more recent years, and the reports, we will see the ones of 2019, what we observe is that the complaints for aggressions, attacks against their properties, etc., in Jewish communities in Britain are more than 100 per month, something that did not exist before. One of the agencies comment that only 21% of British Jews complain about that. So if we multiply this by 5, maybe an estimation, but we could multiply this by 5. This is the graph of the incidents of an anti-Semitic nature motivated by hatred that happened in Britain. To properties, institutions, even homicides. I will speak about France, which is a more preoccupying example. But there exists a conflict, a problem. What is the problem? That it seems that in the United Kingdom, and not only there, different stages have characterized anti-Semitism. The beginning was with the close memory. If there is a caricature or a criticism to the Jews as a group related to Israel problems, the next day a member of parliament or an official document or an editorial of a newspaper, there is a reference saying or asking for excuses, this is not going to happen again, etc. In Spain, sometimes this happens and there's no communication the next day. Then there's an escalation, and there is not only individuals that can feel attacked, but the whole community. And finally, is that anti-Semitism is normalized, and this is the most preoccupying issue. What happens in the United Kingdom and where is it different from Spain and France and from other European countries? That it has to do with the Labour country anti-Semitism. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn, that has been re-elected, has had to accept the abandonment from certain MPs, Labour MPs that were Jews. So we can see that the comparison between left and right is not enough to justify hatred, because it can happen in both sides, and it is the perfect storm. Jews can be criticized, not the state of Israel, with no problem whatsoever. Out of the 1,600 aggressions in 2018, more than 140 are related with the Labour Party, which indicates that it's being normalized in politics in a country that is obviously in the avant-garde. Members of the Labour country, Claire Shore, one of the ministers, in a paranoid way, she declared Israel undermine the fight against climate change. Another member of parliament of the Labour Party, with the issue of the Haiti crisis, that said that the supporters from Israel were there to remove organs for transplants. So these are something that do not have to resign or anything. And 1 out of 5 Britons would say that wouldn't like a Jew as president. So it's not something that is a minor thing, it's a trend. And as I was saying, it appears frequently. You can see some newspapers in the UK, they are normally left-wing newspapers. Here is Ariel Sharon, like Saturn devouring his children. Is anti-Judaism the Middle Ages way, only re-elaborated, or images, brutal images like the ones in The Guardian, 2006, and again is the metonym It is the Star of David. There's no symbol of Israel. It's the Star of David, beating a boy because it has been stung by a wasp. Hezbollah is and the cruelty anyway. So if we observe in the United Kingdom a trend like the one I have said, in Spain it's different. It's a curious thing in Spain. As compared with the UK and France, Spain much less. The Jewish community is only anecdotal. Some people say 12,000. The Jewish community says 45,000 in 47 million is only anecdotal. However, in Spain there is a clear, and among scholars it is spoken about, anti-Semitism without Jews. The expulsion was or happened in 1492 and it was revoked only recently. The Anti-Defamation League put Spain among the most anti-Semitism bias, together with Poland and Hungary. 72% of Spaniards say that Jews are more loyal to Israel than in their country, or where they live or where they were born. The first in the countries surveyed, including Poland and Hungary. It can happen, and this is one of the conclusions of the Spanish case, that in Spain there's no taboo to speak about this. If there is an opinion poll, there's no problem in declaring your opinion about it, and this is the opinion about it. 60% of Spaniards believe that Jews have too much power in finance, and in 67% of international market. 47% of Spaniards think that they speak too much about Holocaust. And Spain, only behind Hungary, say that 25% of all the people polled believed all these statements.
So here you have this chart that shows how Spain ranks compared with these countries, Austria, France, Germany, etc. And that normalization in Spain has pervaded all media. We can find El País, La Razón, regionalist newspapers or nationalist newspapers, left-wing newspapers, right-wing newspapers. So you can find, for example, this graphic humor in Spain. In El Correo, you have Ariel Sharon waving, using the chart of the United Nations as a fan. And then in La Razón you see the Jewish settlements and the Palestinian settlements. So instead of trying to make people compassionate about these people, they make caricatures. So in here you can see Ariel Sharon characterized as a dog with the Palestinian scarf in its mouth. It's a Jewish dog, and we used to say that in Spain. We say Jewish dog, or a dog's a Jew, a Jew is a dog. And then the presidents, former presidents. And then this other image to the right with the sacred book, the rifle, and the flag and the kippah against Ariel Sharon. So it's like confusing everything. It's globalizing everything, generalizing, not just against Israel, just the Jews, it's all the Jews. Or this kibbutz with views to a genocide, to the genocide, a kibbutz with a view. So the bias stays. This is a statement by Juan Carlos Monedero, Spanish politician, in 2018. He says, Israel tests his Holocaust in Palestine. 70 years ago, the Nakba started. Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic, where the Israelis, supported by Great Britain and the United States, and with Europe as an accomplice, decided to hide their shame for the Holocaust by condemning the Palestinian people to a less publicized Holocaust, and the United States didn't open its customs to the exiled Jews, but they offered the houses of others. So it's a normalization of a hatred that can be observed in this well-advanced Europe of values and cultures, etc. So this was the situation in Spain, anti-Semitism without the Jews. In the United Kingdom, there are several currents, but linked to the Labour Party. We find the most complicated case in France, because in France there is the third most important community of Jews in the world after Israel and the United States. In 2009, there were, if I'm not mistaken, 500,000 Jews living in France, and in 2016 there are more than 450,000 Jews, so less, well, 50,000 fewer Jews in 10 years. Why did this happen? We can all think of this series of terror attacks that, yes, normally happens were not targeted to the whole of the population, but the Jewish community. We can see in the background the terror attack on that kosher shop when some Jews were taken hostages, and there was a firing with some casualties, fatal casualties, and you can see some numbers here. You see the increase in the number of anti-Semitic terror attacks from 311 to 541 between 2017 and 2018. And I can highlight some of the most relevant ones, but there have been many of them. The most relevant ones are the torture and assassination of Ilan Halim in 2006, the attack on the Jewish school in Toulouse, 3 girls and a teacher died in 2012, and Mireille Kohl, one of the Holocaust survivors, was assassinated. She was 92 or something like that, and she was assassinated in 2018. So the Jewish community feels unsafe and insecure, because even if the laws are there, the laws are not enforced. These terror attacks are not tackled or curbed, so they feel unsafe. I can give you another example of what I'm saying. Almost 40% of the crimes with religious or racist grounds were perpetrated against Jews in 2017, even if they account only for just 1% of the population. Some researchers, even some leftist researchers and people in the Socialist Party, they wrote this book. These 2 researchers wrote this book next year in Jerusalem. So they mean that probably they will have to flee because Europe is becoming more and more unsafe. And also some paintings, some works are being vandalized. For example, this portrait by Simone Weil with swastika in another cemetery in Strasbourg was vandalized with 80 crosses, 80 swastikas. And I think that this anti-Semitism in Western Europe is different from the Semitism that we can find in Central and Eastern Europe. And it's different, but with some nuances, because it is a anti-Semitism that we allow, that we accept. Because the injustices doesn't enable us to talk about the accomplices of some people in some countries with the Holocaust. So, for example, if a historian, Jan de Bros, published a book in which he described this, he was doing a historical research, and they wanted to remove the medal that he had been awarded. In Hungary, for example, there was a propaganda in the bus stops, and we could also find Soros in the image of superpower that is trying to get the legitimacy away from us. And they use the image of Jew Soros, and not just by Orban's party, also the Jobbik, and the second party in Hungary a few years ago, 10 years ago, was asking for a census of Jews working for the government because they thought they were dangerous. So there are differences. The hatred here is more racial-like and conspiration-like. So by way of a conclusion for these last minutes is that, as we have seen in these reports, everything shows that Jews feel threatened. And it is not just our perception or their perception, because we can think they can feel more threatened in certain areas because they are more sensitive. No, the statistics corroborate it. The second conclusion, anti-Semitism is dimmer. It doesn't come just from the right-wing parties or groups, also from left, far left, and it goes unnoticed, and people normalize it and becomes totally normal. For example, when Israel won the Eurovision contest, all the social media were conquered by people showing their surprise and their disgust at it. And the third conclusion, something that really worries the European Union, the directives, the studies show that this is really concerning. Anti-Semitism is a threat for the health and good shape of democracy. I use rhetorical figure. For me, anti-Semitism is like a canary bird in the mind of democracy. When a canary starts dying, we can say that democracy starts failing or stumbling. And my fourth question, and this is a personal opinion, anti-Semitism is not self-regulating or cannot be self-solved. There are typified hatred crimes or hate crimes. When the Mein Kampf was recently embargoed because the Bavarian government had it when there was republished, re-edited with a beautiful introduction. It was a success. So once the ban will be lifted, it will become again forbidden fruit, and it will be again a success. So there's something behind it that is really controlling it so that nobody can talk about it. So for me, the importance of democracy is, this is really important for the democracy. We need to really rethink the values of this community that has given us many scientists, many people in the academia, many researchers. It is the heritage of Einstein, Freud, Spinoza, many great thinkers in Europe that we should be trying to preserve, and we should be alarmed in how they are being threatened every day. Thank you.
Estoy al habla, sí. ¿Quiénes monitorean?
Yeah, so you were right on time. So yeah, it's 0:00. So you finished just on time. I want to give the floor to Mr. Marcelino, who was the first to ask for the microphone. and then I will pass on the microphone to the next. Thank you. I was really interested by this presentation, but I want to say some personal anecdotes. I want to tell some personal anecdotes. When in the dictatorship, I was a diplomat appointed to the cabinet of the Minister Castilla, who had a son-in-law named Sansbriz. So he was a real important interesting person, and he, well, the minister knew him very well.
La democracia se produce.
And we used to talk about that. So in the democracy, there is resistance against entering into or setting up relations with the Arabs, so they were reluctant to do it. So they created some problems. I totally disagreed with that position, and so I told it to the president of the government. I remember when we visited a conference where the Socialist Party came to Spain, and I told the president, and they expressed their interest to see me, so I hosted them. But I did it under secrecy, because it had to be secret. They forced me to keep it secret. Well, during the democracy, there was people were concerned about, they were interested in obtaining good results from an economic point of view with Saudi Arabia. So they wanted to keep some relations secret with some countries, because we couldn't publicize that we were in touch with Israel, because it would hamper us if we wanted to get relations with other countries.
And thank you so much. I think it was interesting to talk of this topic that's so important for our times. I have a question on the data that you show about France. If you maybe can tell us if probably there is this resurgence of hate against the Jewish community there. Probably because, as you said, there are there is a connection with Islamic communities too. So perhaps I was wondering, as there are so many second and third generation French citizens that actually come from Maghreb, if there might be a connection between them and, I don't know if there is a connection with terrorism, but I mean, you saw the data much more than me, so probably you can tell us something about that. Thank you.
Hola, sí. Bueno, primero.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Oreja for his intervention and his personal anecdotes. Spain reestablished his relations with Israel in 1978, but then the state was only recognized in 1986 when Spain joined the European Union, so a few years later. And in the case of Sansbriz and the relations and the connections or the dialogue with Israel were kept secret for a while. So, well, I'm not going to talk about the Spanish diplomacy during the Holocaust, but thank you for your intervention.
Thankful for your question. Yes, indeed, there is a strong link, a strong connection between second and third generation of immigrants in France with anti-Semitism. Why? Because as we see on surveys, we can, let me think about it. We can see that, for example, they see a discrimination between their status in comparison with the Jews. Why? Because they both emigrate from the north of Africa, for example, but the Jewish community has succeeded while they are still on the value, and they live in worse conditions. So it's a prejudice that is really linked with discrimination and with the start of the hate movement. I don't know if there was another question. No. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sí, enhorabuena por la ponencia. Tengo dos preguntas. Una es, ¿cuál es el criterio para seleccionar las viñetas en el caso de la prensa española? Porque no encuentro diferencia entre antisionismo y antisemitismo. No sé si soy la única, pero me parece que el contexto en el que aparecen esas viñetas tiene más que ver con lo que está sucediendo en los territorios ocupados que con una cuestión de antisemitismo cultural en sentido estricto. Pero bueno, me gustaría que me explicaras el criterio de elección. Yo las que has mostrado, desde luego, no lo veo como algo antisemita, pero sí anti lo que está haciendo el gobierno de Israel. Precisamente porque sale Ariel Sharon y en algunas de ellas, en las que has mostrado, sale la bandera de Israel, en fin. Bueno. Eso por un lado. Por otro lado, querría saber, querría puntualizar.
On the other hand, I wanted to say that in the case of the study, when the book was published in 2001, the government was different. So I'm telling you because I was in New York when the book was presented, and there was a controversy, and there was the memory of the Polish identity was revisited when that survey was published. So I think what is happening now is not that we are refusing our participation in the Holocaust, but the naming convention. We cannot say that those were Polish concentration camps. So it's not the same thing. They're not refusing, they're not denying their involvement, but everything has to do with how the nation states were created. But above all, I'd like to know how you chose the graphic jokes that you used, because I don't understand it. I think more context is needed, because maybe those jokes were published precisely when some attacks were launched into Palestine. I don't think that shows anti-Semitism. I see a community, I see... sorry, the sound is not good.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Any more questions?
Okay, thanks a lot for your presentation. I really liked it. I have a couple of quick questions on because you show us some surveys as regard, I think, only one of the countries. What I would have liked to know is if you have done any sociological analysis of the socioeconomic status of the respondents, meaning that I think it would be interesting to see well, the socioeconomic status of the respondents, whether they are poorer or they are richer, whether they are more educated or less educated, because and maybe the regional provenience. But this is less important, but that would be really interesting to see the socioeconomic status.
Empiezo con...
I will start with Ruth's questions. The selection criterion, Alejandro Bayer is the one that has worked more on graphics, but not recognizing that there is no anti-Semitism in those images is a clear example of what I was saying. There is the religious symbol. There is not necessarily the Israeli flag. It's a Manichaeist, it's a caricature, of course, but it's not only criticizing the state of Israel, but anyone who wears a kippah is is a metonymy, is anti-Semitism, because as I say, it is typified or like that. I mean, so the Alliance Against Holocaust has identified it like that. But when in a British news paper we see that, and the Sharon with the dog, etc., fanning with institutions, fanning themselves with the institutions like the UN, they say, well, he can do. This country can do whatever they want because it's on top of international institutions. It's going back to topics from the past. 11 million inhabitants in the world can be in the Hungary campaigns, or a tweet of Abascal in Vox criticizing with the Ciudadanos party using Soros and Macron. So you can use a Jew to justify all the policies or criticize all the policies of a state. You can criticize the policies of that state, but that generalization, where does it come from? In the Spanish press, sincerely, Sharon fanning with the UN is what is happening. Fanning with the UN Charter is what they're doing. I haven't seen all the figures. With the fangs of a wild boar, etc., that image has been used by fascism since the 19th century, well, fascism in the 20th century, but they're stereotypical images. I am the moderator. I want to introduce Ruth. I understand what you say, but that is the big difference when you try to understand anti-Semitism in contemporary times. Criticizing the state of Israel with caricatures is okay, and that can include the occupation of the territories, the projects of the new settlements, etc., etc. But the illegitimate speech is totally different. Symbols of a religious nature to interfere in politics. Because you're not against Israel, you're going against the Jews. That is a different turn. It may be subtle, but it is there, present in caricatures and in drawings, and it's perpetuated in time. That is the big difference. And the selection, I have taken, as I said, Alejandro Barrex is the best specialist. Is newspapers from many fields, not just where the generalization of the religious issue appears. Regarding Francesco.
About your question, most of the studies doesn't include the socioeconomic status of in the research, but there's one that it included. I think is the Cantor Center of Studies, and I will put it in the survey because there are some differences. But it's not like we may think that people with a better education have a less anti-Semitic thing, a way of thought, because it's not like that. It's quite curious. Yeah.
You are able to demonstrate that the socioeconomic status does not affect the result of the polls. That would be like a jolly, I don't know what to say, but if you associate a lower level of education with a higher anti-Semitism, then you may have different conclusions. If you go for, oh well, the socioeconomic status does not affect it, and then it's another conclusion.
Two of these studies that include the socioeconomic status conclude that there is no difference between educated people or people with money. It's no difference.
Bueno, lo primero, me ha fascinado la...
First of all, it has been fascinating, your presentation, because at the end you have only the legal perspective from public international law, which is what I have to teach my students, or the 181 resolution in the UN, which is always typically mentioned, which gives a legal perspective to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And it is interesting what you said at the beginning. We should differentiate between anti-Semitism and the policies adopted by the Israeli government. From the international public law sphere, they deserve criticism. But how about the criticism regarding an imperialistic graphs on the U.S. Government? There is no equivalence between the criticism against the U.S. and the criticism against Israel. Is there anti-Semitism in the U.S.? When I've been there, Jews, or at least synagogues which I have visited, there are no those security measures. They feel quite comfortable in the U.S. So that part of, or why in the U.S., I may be wrong, but because I'm lay in this field, but why in the U.S. Is this situation, and in Europe the one that you have described? First, thank you, David. It's a very interesting element. The Trump administration is personalized. It is the government or Trump, not a bloody U.S. flag. But in the case of Israel, there are hundreds of examples, only in the Spanish press. So there is more. It is more personalized. With the September 11 attacks, it was not only the issue of the Bush administration, but the Middle East issues there, and on the Jewish community in the US. That would be a totally different case study, which would be very interesting for comparison purposes, but it would be another PhD.
Yeah, thank you, Santiago, for this presentation. It was really interesting. I don't have a question. I have a comment, actually. In Cyprus as well, we have Jews. And they're under the constitution, they are not recognized as a separate community, but they are recognized as a religious group within the Greek Cypriot community, which is the majority in Cyprus. So my comment will be, if you could, as a meta-analysis at a later stage, to compare your results with other contexts, where there are like complex contexts, you may find other results as well, or you may find similar results. So yeah, that will be my comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't know about that, so I will have to look at it. But, well, the problem is, actually my PhD deals with Franco regimes and the Holocaust and the Spanish Foreign Service. So this is just because I'm really interested in anti-Semitism as an ideology. So maybe it will take me a bit too much till I finish my PhD the next year, but I will take into consideration, and I'm really thankful for the information.
Muchas gracias por...
Thank you for your presentation, which has been very interesting. Many things that I didn't know, anti-Judaism versus anti-Semitism, which I have found it very interesting. I have difficulty to remove my legal ideas from the issues that you have mentioned. I have identified them with the legal part that complements your presentation. As you say, the historians poses the problems, and the legal perhaps makes it worse instead of putting a solution to it. But anyway, you speak of the hatred crime, could that mean violence against Jewish population to publish those caricatures? It would be difficult from a legal point of view to pursue that. And in all this debate on whether caricatures represent the state of Israel of the Jews, it could be the ignorance also of the person who is drawing that may not make the difference. The Star of David is the same for all. If you ask anyone what is the difference between a Jew and an Israeli, perhaps you wouldn't find the coherent and appropriate response. And on the other hand, we could perhaps find that same situation with other religions or other groups. For example, Islamophobia in France. There were many caricatures of Allah, but the response there has been more violent with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, etc. So in the freedom of press freedom or freedom of speech is a delicate issue. The defense of the Jewish people may be clear when you defend the people as you do, but when you put that into the legal sphere, it's very complicated. Thank you. I thank your precision. I think it is difficult to take the hatred crime to take it to the tribunals, but how it could be typified as that. But when you say that it could be ignorance, maybe, but the ignorance of a law does not allow to over or circumvent it. You cannot, or it cannot be justified to publish anything that you like, which is addressed to the public opinion. If is an ignorant, don't put him to draw caricatures on this topic. This is just a comment. And on the attacks to the communities, an element that I haven't mentioned but will be in the paper, one of the problems of the Jewish community with these attacks is that they feel, as opposed to other minorities that may have a clearer repercussion of a violent nature, for instance, against discrimination, with the Jews, it doesn't happen. It is a very small minority in quantitative issues or in quantitative terms, but there's not an event of burning a car in reaction to a Jewish attack. It's like the scapegoat. Nothing will happen because people won't rectify, or I won't have to resign from the newspaper for having published these barbaric images. And regarding also to the question of the European countries that have been arriving late to themes that were European. Spain has taken a long time to incorporate the issue of Holocaust, which does not affect only Jews. It started with the law of education. Then in the second law of education, the seventh one, from the last one from 2015 and the other one from 2007, there were no manuals or textbooks in secondary schools which dealt with Holocaust in contemporary history. It has been very recent to take this into account. The historical research shows that it has a lot to do with us, not just with Jews.